sometimes we can't understand why God allows bad things to happen to people. So today we're going to finish talking about a man by the name of Job, who learned that even though he didn't know what God was doing by allowing all this tragedy and heartache to come into his life, he did know that he could trust that God had a purpose. And in the end, what we will see with Job is that he never ever walked away from God. So join us today for our conclusion, allowing God to rewrite our future. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Women's Bible Study. We are super glad you're joining us today. For those of you that don't know anything about our ministry, you can go online to womensbiblestudy.com. There you can get handouts for the lessons for today. You can find out everything you want to know about us, where you can watch us. Our goal is for you to watch Bible study anytime, anywhere. That's kind of what we do here. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas last week. I tried to wear green but then I realized that Christmas was like last week instead of this week. So anyway, I hope you had a wonderful time. We're getting ready for a new year. Kind of super excited for that. All right, we are going through a series called Been There, Done That. And we're trying to find men and women in the Bible who have been in situations that we're in and done and reacted to those situations like we do or like we should. And so we want to learn valuable lessons from these people because a lot of them, their life is turned like upside down, like so many of us have felt, especially in this last year. So last week we started talking about a man by the name of Job. Job had everything going for him. He loved God. God blessed him with money. God blessed him with a large family with 10 kids. Job was kind. He helped people. He was respected. He was giving. But what we learned last week is something we don't really even like to talk about, or even we don't even want to believe it. And it's this, that bad things can and do happen to people who really love God. And that's why we're doing this series, because we're trying to get people to see the truth of that. Because there's a lot of false information going on out there. We hear preachers saying, look, if you just give them money, and God's going to just give you money back, and your life is going to go great. If you're sick, hey, it's probably your fault. It's not God's fault, because God never wants anyone sick. If something bad happens in your life, well, you must have sin in your life someplace. And see, today what we want to do is we're going to come against that. We did that last week, and we're going to learn from Job, from a man who loved God with everything in him. He had no sin in his life that needed confessing. He gave money. He helped people. And yet in one day, everything changed. His children, all 10 of them died in this horrible tragedy. His employees died. His source of wealth was gone. His prominence in society was gone. His body was covered in boils. A month or so ago, I woke up with a blister on my face. I'm like, okay, I've never had a blister on my face before. But it was like the weirdest thing, and I just could not get rid of it, and it was just there for days. And I walked around the house, and I looked at Dusty, and I said, I kind of feel like Job, okay? Which, of course, was nothing like Job. But I get that. Like, you just have something that just isn't working. But imagine that all over your entire body. And I think Job, all this bad stuff happened to him. But what we learn from Job is this. What was going on with Job had nothing to do with him at all. It had nothing to do with sin or that he was a bad person. Nothing was happening to Job except this. God was doing something and thinking one way, and Job was thinking something else. It's kind of like this scene. I don't know why this made me laugh. A couple hunters are out in the wood. One of them falls to the ground, doesn't seem to be breathing. The other one whips out his cell phone and calls the emergency services. He tries to explain to the operator, my friend is dead, what can I do? And the operator, in a very soothing, calm voice, says, just take it easy. First, we need to make sure he's dead. There's silence. Then the lady on the other line hears a gunshot. The guy's voice comes back on the line and says, okay, now what? I don't know why I found this so funny. But here you've got people that are saying things and thinking things two completely different ways. And so here we have Job and God who are not on the same page. Because Job had no idea, as we talked about last week, what was going on in the heavenly realm. It's a contest between Satan and God to see if, in fact, Job really, really loved God, even if everything in his life were taken away from him. And what we learned last week from this glimpse into the spiritual realm is that nothing happens in our life without God's permission. But remember, Job didn't know that. We get the benefit of that truth by reading the story of Job. Because Job's life was written down for us so that we can learn about God and learn things that don't even make sense to us. But maybe it helps us go, I don't know why God allowed that in my life, but now I have a choice, like Job did. Am I going to love God and follow him, or am I not? So in chapter 2, this is where we find Job. He's got boils all over his body. Verse 8, Job 2, verse 8 says this, Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. And if that isn't bad enough, look at verse 9. His wife said to him, Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Now, his wife gets a really bad rap in this story, and I totally get that because you don't really tell your husband who's sitting in a pile of ashes with boils all over his body that. But in defense of her, she just lost 10 children. Like her whole world had just turned upside down. She was probably a total mess and probably totally angry with God. And it's kind of understandable at the first part of it. But I think for Job, even though he believed that God was doing something, and of course at that point he has no idea what it is, and even though he trusted God, I do think that here he felt profound grief. Imagine losing everything. Imagine if you lost your home, your dogs, your cats, your children, your husband, your money, your bank account, everything in one day. I don't think you, or I don't even think Job, would be sitting there singing, Our God is an awesome God. But we see this in Job 3, verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. It's so interesting. He never curses God. He curses the day of his birth. Please know this, is that sometimes we feel that way. I wish I'd never been born. The pain is so painful that if I'd never been born, I would never have to feel this. But here's what we learned from Job is this, that grief is a part of life. And from his words that he curses the day he was born, I think that's how people feel when they lose someone or something dear to them. For some of you, it's a child, a spouse, a parent. For some of you, it could be a dog or a cat. And the only reason why I say that is because the other day I was flipping through some pictures. I don't even know why I was looking at this thing on my computer. And this picture came up. These were our 3 dogs that we used to have. And the minute I saw this picture, like my heart just became so sad. And I miss them. And they're dogs, for crying out loud. But grief is grief. And it just is. And there's just sadness and heartache that go along with all of that. But a lot of times, like we see in Job, you just wish you'd never been born. So I just want to encourage you that if those of you that are dealing with grief, that you don't have to feel bad for grieving. Like people go, well, I trust God and I'm too spiritual to grieve. No, it doesn't really work that way. In the Bible, it's interesting. God even gives people a grieving period. If you were a Jewish person in the Jewish culture, if someone you loved died, there was a 7-day mourning period. But if it was someone really important, it would be 30 days. Look at Jacob, when Jacob died in Genesis 50, verse 10. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly, and there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. But in Deuteronomy 34:8, we see this. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning were over. So see, I think that there's this mourning period. Here you go. I think God has a purpose for grief. And here's what I think. Grief is a natural response to loss as we try and remember this. Ecclesiastes 3:1-2. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. But we always want to remember this. Psalms 30 verse 5, weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. And Job would learn that eventually. That laughter and happiness would come again someday. But for right now, as he's sitting in a pile of ashes with boils all over his body and just lost everything, I think he was sad and he was hurt and he was confused. So what we see is his friends. He's got these friends and they show up to comfort Job. Job 2 verse 11, when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar, they heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. Those are some good friends. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. We have a friend who lost their son a few years ago. And then a couple years after that, they lost their daughter. The morning I found out that their daughter died, I went over there with another friend of mine. And honestly, I had no words. I didn't even know what to say. There's nothing you can say in a time like that. Because anything I said would just sound stupid to them at that time. But for Job's friends, they just sat there. They did what friends should do. You just sit there quietly and listen. If Job wanted to talk, great, let him talk. Let him pour out his grief. But for 7 days, these guys just kept their mouths shut. But apparently on day 8, they got their voices back. And what we find is that wasn't really a good thing. And for those 7 days, they probably had all these thoughts in their mind. And they needed to tell Job why all these horrible tragedies had come into his life. Because they thought they had all the answers. And they thought they had this formula to life. Because we all want God to give us that formula. We all, that's just neat and tidy and easy. Like, if you do A and B, then God will bless you. But if you do C and D, God will curse you. I mean, we just want to know that in our brains. But remember, we kind of have read the whole book of Job. And we realize that nothing in Job's life was caused by his sin or his children's sin. It wasn't like an easy, if you do A and B or C and D. It was nothing like that. It was caused by something so random, a contest between Satan and God. But Job doesn't know that. And his friends clearly don't know that. They're just going off of what they assume is happening. But his friends are a lot like us. We always want to know the why. Why did that person die? Why did that person get sick? Why did that person's husband leave him? And our conclusion, if we don't say it out loud, is usually in our brain. And it's like, well, they must have done something wrong. They must have sin in their life. Because that's just what we do as people. But if you stand on the Word of God, we can realize that isn't true when we learn that from Job. So what transpires for the next 35 chapters is that Job is sitting with his friends. He says something, his friends say something back, Job tries to respond. I mean, this is just this back and forth, and his friends would say something stupid, and Job would be like, that's not true. But Job is just kind of like a mess at this point. So his first friend, Eliphaz, starts with his theory. And his theory is this: Job, what's happening to you is because someone sinned. That's how God works. You sin, God punishes. Look at you, Job. Of course you sinned. Look at Job verse 4. Then Eliphaz replied, if someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Think how you've instructed many, how you've been strengthened, how you've strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees. He's building him up like, Job, you're so awesome, but then here you go. But now trouble comes to you, and you're discouraged. It strikes you, and you're dismayed. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? Consider now who, being innocent, has ever perished. Where were the upright were ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. At the breath of God, they are destroyed. At the blast of his anger, they perish. In other words, Job, the formula is that you must have done something really bad because God is kind of like, you reap, you sow. You've done something wrong, Job. It's so evident. So his next friend gets up, Job 8, verse 1. Then Bildad replies to Job, how long will you go on like this? You sound like a blustering wind. Does God twist justice? Does the Almighty twist what is right? Your children must have sinned against him, so their punishment was well deserved. Could you even imagine saying something like that to a friend who just lost 10 children? You're going through this, Job, because your 10 kids sinned. Like, okay, he's not a very good friend at this point. And then his third friend, Elihu, chimes in with this in Job 34:11. He repays people according to their deeds. He treats people as they deserve. In other words, you deserve this. You've done something wrong. These friends of Job are kind of like two of these three boys. This made me laugh. Three mischievous boys went to the zoo one day. They decided to visit the elephant cage, but they were picked up by the police for causing a commotion. So they haul them off to the zoo security, and the supervisor says, what's your name, and what were you doing in the elephant cage? And the first boy said, my name is Gary. I was just throwing peanuts into the elephant cage. The second added, my name's Larry, and all I was doing was throwing peanuts into the elephant cage. The third boy said, he was very shaken up. He said, well, my name is Peter, but my friends call me Peanuts. But see, that's probably how Job feels about his friends. Like he's Peanuts and they're just throwing him into the elephant cage. Like that must be how he felt about it. Now, in fairness to the friends, I understand where they get this line of thinking. Because even though Proverbs wasn't written at this particular time, it's a general principle, and Proverbs talks a lot about it, that we reap what we sow. If you work hard, you're going to get financial gain. If you're lazy, you're not going to have food. If you do stupid things, there's consequences. And we play that out in our head like it's a formula. People who smoke, they're going to die of lung cancer. Alcoholics, they're going to die of liver disease. People die in car accidents because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. And see, that's just so neat and tidy to us. I have someone just texted me the other day and said, so-and-so has lung cancer. My first thought was, of course he does. He smoked all of his life. Okay? Why wouldn't he? But that's a formula in my mind that I like to think. But it's not really true because you know what? There are people who die of lung cancer who have never smoked a day in their life. I assume there's people who die of liver disease that have never had a drink in their life. People die in car accidents all the time wearing their seatbelt. So here's the bottom line is just because someone does things right doesn't always mean that nothing bad will happen to them. So bad things can and do happen to people who really love God. So we need to really realize that there is this general principle that when you make good choices, that God will bless that. I mean, that's all over the Bible. But what we have to realize is it's not 100% true all the time. Because there is a mystery about God that I will never understand. I don't know why he lets certain things happen. It doesn't make sense to me at all. I will never know why he let sweet Nabil Qureshi, who loved Jesus, had this brilliant future as an evangelist to Muslims, die of stomach cancer at 32. I'll never get over that. Like, God, what were you thinking? Why would you allow that? That makes no sense. I will never know why our friend Lee died of COVID. And he has this ministry of helping men get off the streets and off of drugs and rehabilitating them. I'm like, why would you let that happen? Or why a pastor that we knew, Tom Schrader, one of the best communicators of the gospel, died at 69. Now that seems young. I'm like, God, you could have given him 20 more years. See, I don't get a lot of things that God does. But what we learn from Job is this, is that God knows. We may never know this side of heaven, but that will have to be okay. See, Job didn't know, but he did know that God knew. And that was really important. I love this. Here's the key. We don't know. We don't need to know, but we need to know the God who knows. We don't actually need to know the reason why God does what he does, but we do need to know God, who himself knows, if that makes sense. Job's friends couldn't see this. We see them show up, they're nice for 7 days, and then they're like, hey, Job, man, we love you, man, but we got to tell you the truth in love. You know how people do that sometimes. You must have done something to deserve this. So if you, Job, would just confess, we'll get you right back on track. And Job is probably confused because remember, he doesn't know what's going on. But somewhere along the line, we see this. We see Job starts getting his perspective back. We see a glimpse of this in Job 13:15. He says this to his friends, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. I love that. Though he slay me, though he take everything away from me, you know what? It doesn't matter. I will trust him. And I think that is the place that you, all of us need to get to. A place that no matter what happens in our life, we just say, I'm going to trust God. I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to settle in and just believe that there's a purpose for what he's allowing into my life. But I want to go back to the fact that in the moment, when there's a knock on the door and you open it and the police are standing there with bad news, the moment that phone call comes through at 2 a.m. in the morning with that horrible news, everything in your life goes dark, which is probably what did happen to Job for a minute. But a lot of times our faith goes dark. And I want you to know that actually is normal. We're human beings. We feel pain. And during the darkness is the time that we feel the most far removed from God. I had a best friend when we were first married, and we both got pregnant at the same time. For our first child, we both got pregnant the second time with their kids. They were supposed to be born a few days apart. Our Jessie lived. Her Jacob died. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time in our life. But she told me later that she said she would pray and she felt as if her prayers were just bouncing off the ceilings. She said, I have never felt so far from God in all my life. See, Job reminds us what that feels like, what my friend felt like when life just turns tragic. Look at Job 23. He says, look, I go forward, but he's not there. God is not there. And backward, but I can't perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. In other words, Job says this, I don't feel God's presence anywhere. I go forward. I try to read my Bible. I go to church. I feel nothing. Nothing. The greatest part of Job is this. He doesn't just say, because I feel nothing, I'm walking away. He doesn't say that. I think he doesn't stop there because he doesn't allow himself to stay in that dark place. See, a lot of people stay in that dark place. They never move on from that. They walk away from God. They're angry with him. They just leave because they're like, I'm so mad. And then they continue this darkness for years and years and years. Micah 7:8 says this, do not rejoice over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will arise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. It's a saying that, yes, life is bad and it feels really dark right now. But you know what? I'm not going to let this keep me down. The Lord is going to come along and be a light to me again one day. And I think Job starts to see this. Verse 10 says this, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Job is like, you know what? If this is a test from God, I refuse to fail. I'm not going to fail this test. And when I read that, I thought, what would happen in our life if we all looked at the bad things that happen to us just like that? No matter if I lose that, or no matter if that happens, or no matter if this person leaves me, no matter what happens, I will come forth as gold. I will never, ever walk away from God, no matter what is taken away from me. Verse 11, he says, my foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Job says, here's the deal. Even though I can't see what God is doing, I'm not walking away from him. I will always keep him in front of me. I will always keep his word. I will continue to treasure what he has told me. And what we see with Job is just this word, hope. Hope that there's just more to this just than what's going on this earth today. I thought this was cute. A 95-year-old woman was in a nursing home. She received a visitor from her church. The visitor said, how are you feeling? She said, I'm just worried. I said, well, what are you worried about? And she said, well, she says, every close friend of mine has already died and gone to heaven. And I'm afraid they're wondering where I am. And I love that, but it's just hope. It's just hope saying there's more to this life. I just know when I die, my friends are in heaven. I will be there. Like, I just know that. And Job seems to get this. Job seems to really understand this. This is the most amazing verse in Job. Look at this. Job 19, verse 25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. You're like, what? Okay, this is back in the time of like Genesis. What do you mean you know your Redeemer lives and he will stand on this earth? Job did not have the book of Revelation to go to. He did not have the book of Zechariah to go to. Look at Zechariah 14. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations. This is end time stuff. And when he fights on a day of battle, and in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in Jerusalem. Jesus is coming back, and he will stand on this earth again, and he will rule and reign from Jerusalem. And Job just says, I know my Redeemer lives and that he will stand upon the earth. It's so fascinating that he would say something like that. There's hope for the future. There's so much more than what we think this earth has to offer us. And then Job says this in verse 26. Remember, he's got boils all over his body, and he says, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another, how my heart yearns within me. See, I think Job can get through everything that he's going through with all the tragedy and loss because he really believes there's something so much better after death. He's sitting there just a mess. And yes, he hangs on to the fact that his flesh won't always look like that. And that one day he will see God. We're watching Dusty's taking all these biology and chemistry courses, and it's just like, it's really, really hard. He spends a lot of time studying. He knows he has to get a good grade, so he knows he has to work harder than everyone, sleep less. He doesn't really have a social life. But here's the deal with Dusty and his test. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because of this. There's an end game he's focusing on. He wants to be a dentist. That's the end game that he is focusing on. And see, as Christians, our end game is eternity, where we know that there's no more tears, no more sadness. That's our hope. And I really believe that that was Job's hope, and I think that's what got him through everything that he was going through. So finally, Job stands up to his friends. Nope, not going to buy into what you're saying. There's no sin in my life. He's like, I don't have any idea what God is doing. But you know what his friends say? Well, you're just being prideful, Job. Look at all the pride in your life. You think you're so self-righteous. And that's when God steps in. God is done with this conversation with Job and his friends because his friends are nutcases in the eyes of God. God steps in and is like, you have no idea what you're saying to my man Job. Now, I want to just say this really quick, that's kind of a great lesson for us. The friends are saying things that aren't true because they don't really know the whole situation. Here's what I say. We need to be very careful to judge a situation that we have no idea what God might be doing. I'm dealing with a situation right now where there's two sides. There's the husband and the wife, and I get the wife's side. It makes total sense to me. But the other side is like, there's just anger coming from these people and hatred and all. And the reason why is because they don't see the whole picture and they don't see what God is doing. And see, so often we want to judge people without seeing the whole picture of what God just might be doing in that situation. So we have to be really careful of that, because God came down hard on Job's friends because they were saying things that absolutely weren't true. That's a side note, bunny trail. All right, so God shows up in Job 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by my words without knowledge?" The New Living Translation says this: "Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" In other words, what is wrong with your friends, Job? They're so ignorant to what I am trying to do here. And then God does something so amazing. For chapter after chapter after chapter, God questions Job. God questions Job, not the other way around. See, God didn't let Job ask God questions. God didn't say, "Hey, Job, what are your questions for me?" And Job's like, why would you do this to me? And I loved my kids, and how could you? And what were you thinking? And do you not know that you hurt me? And do you know the pain I'm going through? Nope. God never let Job ask one question, but instead it flipped. God asked Job questions. It's kind of like so many people are so angry over this election, and they're mad at God. Because like I said, half the country is elated. The other half are just so angry because I think they all prayed for their guy to win. And of course, God says no to some people. But then they turn around and they blame God for it. But God reminds us here of this fact. You have no idea what I'm doing, is what God is saying. You have no idea what I'm doing in the United States of America. You have no idea what I'm doing in the world. And see, by God not letting Job utter one question, God punched a hole in his friend's theology. That bad things happen because you're a bad person. God punched a hole in his friend's theology that tragedy happens because you're sin, because none of that was true. And Job's friends were considered ignorant for even saying that. God needed to show Job what you and I need to know and stand on, which is this: God can do anything he wants because he is God. Job 38:4. Here's the question that he asked Job. "Hey, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." Where were you, Job? Like, this is kind of my gig down here. It's not yours. So where were you when I did all this? And that was question 1 of chapter after chapter of questions. And here were some of them. Hey, Job, do you know the expanse of the earth? Do you know where darkness comes from? Do you know where I keep it? Do you know where the waves stop or why they stop? And do you know about the stars? And do you know how many things are under the sea? And oh, by the way, do you know about the clouds and the snow and the rain and the hail? And oh, do you know how I feed the eagles and ostriches and mountain lions? And by the time God gets done with Job after 77 questions, Job doesn't even bother to ask his why questions because he got the picture. God can do anything he wants because he is God. And see, the more we know that, and the more we know him, the more we learn how he works, the more we learn his heart, we believe that what God allows into our life, he always has a purpose. Think of that for everything Job went through. Think of the purpose for that was to show us thousands of years later that God is awesome. And we don't need to contend with God for anything bad that goes on in our life. What we learn is Job just the whole prosperity gospel thing, the story of Job just blows that right out of the water. What we learn from Job is that bad things can happen to godly people, and it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. And it doesn't mean you don't have enough faith. Job teaches us that God does things a lot of times that make no sense. But when we decide to follow Jesus, this is what it means. Jesus, I am surrendering it all. See, that we miss that in our come to Jesus speeches. We're so desperate to get people to get to heaven, so pray this quick little prayer. No, I don't think that works that way. I think, yeah, people can pray the prayer, and they probably do, Jesus, come into my life. But when you truly mean that, that means you're surrendering it all. You're surrendering your entire life, just like Job did. God, my life is yours. You want to take my 10 kids? You want to take my wealth? Whatever. It's yours. That means this. He, meaning God, is the potter. We're the clay. He molds and shapes us however he wants so he can use us. That's what we're giving over when we give our life to Jesus. We're not just saying a quick prayer so we can get into heaven. That's not true. We're literally giving our life to Jesus so he can be the Lord and boss of our life from here on out. What the Bible says we do, because our boss tells us to do that. Here's the other one. He's our shepherd. We're the sheep. He leads us where he needs us. Job knew this. He really understood this. So when God asked Job question after question, Job suddenly stops and gets this really big high view of God. And in the middle of the question, Job responds like this in Job 42:1. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. And then Job confesses this in 3. You asked, who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. In other words, here you go. God does not need to explain himself to us. If you have a why God question, some people always ask me, Lisa, why would, and I always say, any question that begins with why, I have no answer for. I don't know why God does what he does. But he doesn't need to explain himself to us. Second one is this, he owes us nothing. Think about that. He owes us nothing. He doesn't owe us an answer. He's God. And the third one is this, we owe him everything. When Jesus died on a cross and took our sins upon himself, he rose from the dead to show us he has conquered death. He paved a way for us to spend eternity with him. We owe him everything. Here's what we need to know. We serve him. He doesn't serve us. We serve him. We have this weird thing about this Christianity that says, I'm supposed to pray, and God, I want that guy, and I want that job, and I want that money. And yes, we should pray about things like that. But God doesn't serve us. We serve him. And we say, God, I would like that guy, or like that job, or like that whatever, because we can serve you, God, at that place. We serve him. He doesn't serve us. But here's what you need to know, because some of you have lives like Job. I have a friend, I swear, I think her life is just like Job. She's lost more people than I can even tell you. But some people like Job, God has called to very difficult lives, where maybe you've lost everything. Maybe you or a child has gone to prison. Maybe you're raising a handicapped child until the day you die. Maybe you're asked to take care of a spouse that has Alzheimer's for 30 years. A girl in high school, my sister's high school class. Like, she married her high school sweetheart. And I don't know, year 25, when he was 25 or maybe 30, he gets Alzheimer's. And she takes care of him for the next, 30 years. That's hard. That's not how I thought my marriage was going to go. We were going to set up home and have a bunch of kids. And you're like, I'm taking care of someone. Sometimes God calls people to that. Sometimes God calls people to die for their faith. But Job reminds them of this. Job 121. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed the name of the Lord be praised. So the more we know God, the easier that will be to say. The more we understand what following him is all about, the more we can start enjoying where God has us, even if it's in a really bad place. Emily Kingsley was the mother of an autistic child. I want to sort of end with this story. Here's what she says. We'll put it on the screen and you can follow it along with me. She said, I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a vacation to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and you make your plans, the Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some new phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. And after months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. But several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." And you're like, "Holland? What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy." But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and now you must stay there. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to some horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence and famine and disease. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, Holland has tulips, Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy. And they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, "Yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned." The pain of that will never go away because the loss of that dream is a very significant loss. But look what she says. "But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very beautiful things about Holland." I love that. See, I bet Job imagined the last years of his life like going on a trip to Italy. I bet in his mind he was planning things like, "I'm going to have lots of cattle and sheep and 10 children flourishing and all my grandchildren playing in the yard." I bet he planned on taking care of the hurting, taking care of the people forever that worked for him. But instead he ended up in a place he never, ever expected. And instead of Italy, he ended up in Holland. Nowhere where he'd planned. No, he never planned that the people who worked for him would die. He never planned for his children, 10 of them, to die. He never planned for his livelihood to be gone, or his prestige to be gone, or boils all over his body. But let's learn a valuable lesson from Job. For all the bad things that happened to him, he got a first-hand glimpse of who God was. And I think when we really get to that place where we really get this glimpse of who God is, I think the things of this world, no matter what it is, grow strangely dim. I really do. Job 42 verse 4 says this, "And you said, 'Listen now and I will speak. I will question you and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes.'" In other words, you know what, God? I have nothing to say. You're so awesome. I'm repenting. Because now I see you. I never really saw you before, but now I get it. And for a lot of you, where you've ended up may not be where you had planned. But I will say this, I bet those of you that really hung in there and with God and with your faith, I bet you, like Job, know God better. I bet you have a much deeper relationship with God than most people around you that didn't go through the heartache and tragedy that you did. And hopefully, we will let God do with us what Job let God do with him. And that is this. Job let God rewrite his future. Because when it was all said and done, Job's future looked different than it was originally thought. But God gave Job back double of everything. Double the cows and double oxen and double sheep and double servants and double everything except not double children. He gave him 10. He didn't give him 20 because 20 is a lot. But no matter what God gave Job, you know what? I don't think it compared to hearing directly from God and getting to know him on a level that you and I probably never will. I think Job finally understood this, and we read this verse last week, Matthew 6. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up your treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." We want to make Jesus our treasure so that no matter whatever happens in our life, and God forbid if it was something like Job's life, that we would be able to say the exact words that Job said. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Father, thank you for the life of Job. It is amazing the things that he went through. But God, thank you for what we learned from his life. I pray, God, for anyone that is going through bad things like Job, that you would be with them, that you would show up in their life just like you did in Job's life, so that they can walk away and say, you know what, I praise you, God, even though the bad has come into my life. Thank you, Jesus, for all you've done for us. In your name we pray. Amen. See you next week.